Hey everybody, another video for you guys here. This time going to be a prediction on what I think patch 1.07 will hopefully address. I think specifically a lot of the melee stuff needs attention, and also shields and some sort of, I guess we'd call it just like interesting text or poor animations or interactions that need to likely be patched in order to prevent a couple things in the game from just being so dominant in the meta. A sign of a well-balanced game is when a lot of different things can be used and there isn't sort of a concentration point on certain items in the game. You'll probably already know a lot of examples of this, things like the double Zimmerman PS shields, or even just the PS shields in general. The very frequent seeing of the plasma thrower hammer in a lot of different builds. So yeah, hopefully in this video I'm just going to talk about a couple of the things that I think are no-brainer changes that are in dire need of being patched in order to keep the game populace from abandoning the series, or even just this game, and making sure that people are able to express their creativity in their builds at a high level in the game before things need to get too concentrated on the meta. I'd actually hope that the meta doesn't concentrate at all, and that everything in the game can see its niche and its own use in some unique ways. Okay, so to start, I'm gonna take a crack at the shields patch changes that I think will be upcoming here. So this particular area in the game needs quite a bit of tweaking, I think, and it's very evident by the fact of how dominant the PS shield here is, the VP61 PS. My first prediction is going to be that they're going to reverse the deploy heat buildup between this shield and the parry buckler, or I like to call it the VP61, but I call it the parry buckler even though they're both pulse bucklers. This is supposed to be the shield that you equip when you intend to parry. However, with only 2 deploys consecutive and a third one if you're willing to overheat it, it just doesn't have enough use to be able to warrant taking it over this shield. I mean, yes, this one's less efficient, but the truth is, because of the way interaction or impact and stagger works in this game, once you stagger once, the fight is over or very nearly over in a lot of cases, and so it doesn't really matter if you took more damage and a little bit more impact here if you still win the impact race in a very dominant fashion. And this shield allows you to basically secure that, where the PB buckler wouldn't have, like, the lack of deploys makes it so that even if you do parry the first 2 shots, this shield's still going to end up taking the win, because yeah, they you both exchange shots for 2, and let's assume you both perfectly parry it. Let's say like 2 double Zimmermans running against each other. The person with this shield is going to be able to continue blocking and get some solid double Zimmerman shots into the opponent once the parry buckler is overheated. And so yeah, this shield's less efficient. It should not be so dominant as a parry shield as it is currently, especially with that 0.6 IG duration. And by the way, even if you mess up the parry, the shield's still pretty good at almost 60% damage mitigation and then 40% impact mitigation. So yeah, first prediction, you're going to see the deploy heat buildup on this get nerfed such that you can only use it twice, 3 times if you're willing to overheat it. And skipping ahead here, the PB buckler will see the reverse. So this one currently is 2 deploys, 3 if you're willing to overheat it. You're going to see this get buffed up to 5 deploys, maybe 4 deploys, 5 if you're willing to overheat it. But the point is giving you more opportunities to flash this one, but it's going to be a higher skill to successfully parry, a little bit more unreliable with that halved IG window, and then also doubly working to punish you if you mess it up. The damage and impact mitigation is only 35% when you mess up. So I think that all reliable here is going to become less reliable, and the PB buckler will start to reward players who are willing to risk going for parries with this smaller window to make it kind of like what the double Zimmerman PS shield build is currently. So to start, I'm going to look at a top 100 player here and just show how the PS shield at higher skill levels is simply too easy to use. So 0.6 seconds with that many deploys and running a double Zimmerman, you can see how completely shut down melee weapons are, despite for some reason having the PA interference stat. So another thing to keep in mind too in the stagger race here is that a lot of times these builds will also have pulse armor, meaning they can refresh the stagger bar once. So the time to stagger is extremely long and also extremely easy to secure, unless they're running like weapons that can somehow bypass the shield, like the Javelin Beta, for example, is a nice touch. And those things should exist, but again, the PS shield is functioning a little bit too much as just a build check, and a little bit too much of a, okay, if you didn't have these couple of items as in your kit, then unfortunately the match is basically over. I should also mention too that I'm actually using the PS shield here as well to kind of just highlight how bonkers the long duration it is for matches to ever get to a stagger, and how one-sided it is. If one person has the PS shield and the other one doesn't, this would be a completely different fight. And unfortunately, yeah, it's just a bit too much of a build check rather than being a useful item. It becomes just an oppressive item when it's got this many deploys. You need to have a realistic opportunity to expect to overheat the shield when you're versing it, and with the PS shield as it stat sits now, that just doesn't exist. You will get staggered before they overheat the shield. Okay, so another sort of, this might be more of an issue with the Coral Oscillator, but something in this match that you're going to notice is that the Coral Oscillator, when you're stagger extending with the punch and then you go into with your right hand, then you go to punish with the Coral Oscillator, the animation is too long that they can redeploy the shield before the Oscillator even strikes, even though they're ACS staggered, which is kind of bonkers. I think that that's probably more of the Oscillator problem, though. They need to speed up the animation, and I'll get into that when I get to the melee weapons. But it's one example of, again, just these techs that exist on the shields that make them oppressive. And this goes for kicks, this goes for like a lot of other different types of punishes that are a little bit on the slower side. Shields deploy faster, or sorry, shields open where soon enough where a quick burst would not move you enough to prevent getting hit by an attack. So like, yeah, you might start the quick burst, but the kick's still going to connect. So you'll notice here, they can actually parry the Coral Oscillator there. Another interesting thing too, you can parry the stun baton's detonation and other electrical discharges, which also doesn't really make sense given that that's on the mech, not behind, not hitting the shield. So I think that's probably a bug that needs to be addressed, but yeah, just more examples of the shields just having far too much utility for where they ought to be. This would also go for Assault Armor too, by the way. So if you trigger the stagger and they pop Assault Armor, then you counter pop Assault Armor. They can deploy the shield and block your stagger, and then re-stagger you, which is backwards. Assault Armor needs a lot of things too, and that's probably going to be the next thing we'll talk about here. But the Assault Armor is the only expansion that comes with all of these downsides, when a lot of the other ones just are very simple and reliable, and there's no real major downside to them. So yeah, I'll talk about Assault Armor once we finish up here in the match and address some of those points. Okay, in the next clip I just want to show the stun baton detonation getting blocked by a shield too, so take a look at that here. So here I want to take a look at the unreliability of assault armor. I think they need to expand the radius ever so slightly to make hits register completely. So there you just saw an example of a low stability build not being restaggered despite being nearby. This also has issues when opponents are up in the air and they drop. I don't know if they should get rid of that or just make the radius the way to solve that problem, but that does need to be addressed. Again, pulse armor does not have any weaknesses like this, so it begs the question why only assault armor has these issues. Also the question is whether or not tanks and heavy tetras should be able to not be restaggered upon assault armor. I don't think that that is a well-balanced decision. Tanks and heavy tetras are already extremely hard to restagger. Getting close to them is usually a very dangerous position, and securing the assault armor ought to reward the player rather than penalizing them, where they're basically going to get punished as soon as they wake up from that pulse armor. So let's talk about the individual melee weapons and their adjustments that are needed. We'll just work from top to bottom here. So I think the pile bunker is fine, to be honest. I might want to look at the charge up animation just being a little bit faster so that people can't get staggered and then immediately deploy shields. That again may be an issue with the shields themselves, though. They just recover and deploy too quick, but that would involve tinkering with the AC system and shield animation. So I think the simplest solution would probably be just to speed up the animations of the weapons themselves. The pile bunker is fine, though. It's probably in a really good spot. I would say that they could even hold off on doing anything this one. Same for the explosive thrower. The double trouble is really unreliable in the tracking on the charged up hit, and so that definitely needs to be addressed. It is a very difficult weapon to use outright, just because you have to charge it before you can do the punish. I would suggest they speed that up a little bit so that because like milliseconds matter in melee punishes, especially with these big types, especially one this heavy that slows you down as much as it does. So, and then the light attacks, just speed up the animation again. This is going to be a running trend for a lot of melee weapons. A lot of their animations are their actual downsides, and it holds so many of them back from being viable at higher levels of play, when the fix for it is fairly simple: just speed them up. Stun Baton, you can see my separate video for this one. Again, it boils down to animation, not damage. I actually made this prediction before the patch came out about what it needed. They didn't do it, and sure enough, it's still regulated to unusable. The damage was needed maybe just for the trade-off in the detonation, but it didn't really address the fundamental heart of the weapon. Its charge lunge needs to be much faster. I would say double, or sorry, like half to a third as much time. A lot of the animations in the different melee weapons are also held back by the fact that you don't start moving as soon as you do it. You sort of like charge up and then move forward. So the light lunge on this is also slow, by the way. You got to make it as fast as the dagger. I don't know why it isn't, but that needs to be fixed. So let's look at the charge here. There's like a long delay there, and you can't have that for lunges. It completely neuters their ability to actually close the gap to the enemies, especially with the speed difference between the Kikaku and the Flugel and lightweight builds. So yeah, we need the lunge to be a lot quicker. Laser dagger's fine. I don't honestly think this needs anything. It's perfectly well balanced as it is. Kind of like that scene from the Marvel movie there. Laser sword, light lunge, again, that long delay before you start moving forward needs to be snipped. Got to take that out. The charge animation's too slow and the recovery's too slow. The tracking is a problem, and so it needs to have the hitbox made taller. I'll actually just jump into that one separately. I'll just do a whole section of this one because I feel like this one needs to be rectified pretty quickly. It's just flat out classed by the pulse blade at the moment. I'm going to jump into a ranked match so I can just show the laser sword's weakness here. So I think 3 changes are needed, maybe more, but the hitbox on the charge attack needs to be taller, so hit above and below a little better to work on those tracking issues. Hitting directly, because you move forward while you use it, you oftentimes will put the enemy right behind you, which makes the second swing miss, even if you land the first one. So I think removing the forward momentum on the swing would do a lot. And then speeding up the light attack lunge is essential. So right now it's just, this weapon is flat out classed by so many other weapons, the pulse blade and the hammer, depending on how you look at the laser sword, either as a zoning tool or as a chase down tool. But you need the light lunge to be fast and threatening to lightweight mechs. As of now, it's just not. So there you can, if you land the first hit, you should guarantee the second. I'm not sure why this can't be done, but it definitely is needed. Just gonna lead over battery here on this. Yeah, because I don't have a reliable lunge, I can't actually even do what I normally do with Pulse Blade here, which is to try to chase you down with AB. It holds you still too long, and yeah, it's basically just a useless lunge. So you can do some damage with it, but you might as well swap for the Pulse Blade. It just accomplishes everything that the laser sword does better. Arguably even zoning, just because the Pulse Blade charge attack hits so fast. So I hate when that happens. Another thing I would really like to see with laser weapons is the laser drone should have its light attack consecutive hits happen faster so that you can prevent laser weapons from accumulative decaying so fast. That would be cool. I'll save another clip here to just showing how unreliable the lunge is on the laser sword is. So let's try to land a laser lunge on an opponent that's actually just a floating type, which is, in theory, fairly reliable to land lunges on. So again, you can see the slow speed of the lunge takes away any real threat in what it would otherwise pose. It doesn't actually present any real threat. The tracking is just too poor, and the speed too slow to compensate for such poor tracking. I have tried experimenting with the dagger, by the way, just adding another, make the dagger just a single flash to prevent any, what do you call it, dagger escapes. But, yeah, the laser sword shouldn't need to rely on that. It is supposed to have a lunge, so give it a lunge that works. Okay, let's show another example of the laser sword's slow lunge, just relegating it to useless. Again, anybody with high mobility. So again, if you're going to give the melee weapon a lunge that's very comparable to the Pulse Blade, as is clearly reflected in the stats, it does 1100 impact for the 12, but no mini stun, and just a super delayed animation. I think that it was supposed to be the horizontal slash to the vertical leaning option of the Pulse Blade. You can see what I mean though, it's too slow, and I'm using the Kikaku by the way, so not even using the Flugel. I'm trying to make this viable with the best possible movement class. But yeah, you can see just far too slow. We'll try to body him into the corner here, but it's not going to make a difference. Too slow. Cannot slow it down. Even to just backpedal lightweight. So that is quite debilitating for a melee weapon. The Laser Slicer is already really good. The only thing I would probably worry about on this one is the charge up animation doesn't do enough damage and impact mitigation. I think it's around 30%, but like you might as well just AB with it. And its charge up animation is very hard to bait opponents into it. Like when people are trying to build rushdown double Zimmermans, again, the starting charge up animation is too long. If I want to make a read on an opponent and make a prediction what they're going to do, I should get rewarded for it. Here, I make a read and they have like this half second of warning time to see what I'm doing and then just to QB backwards because the lunge doesn't move forward fast enough and far enough to catch up to them if they just see this charge up here. So I understand wanting to be careful with it and not overtune it so that it's powerful, but where it is right now, it's simply, even if you make a read on what your opponent's doing, it's not going to reward you. So if they don't want to speed up the animation on this one and keep it that telegraphed, then you've got to make the damage reduction substantial. It interacts different than shields, by the way, so you still do decay down to a cumulative impact, so it's doubly effective, but again, it's just not enough to ever make it really warranted. You might as well just AB at them for that impact reduction and just use like another weapon in the meantime. The laser lance is cripplingly held back by its poor tracking and again just long charge up animations here. So the light attack I think is fine, but the charge up one here way too long and then it just misses way too often. So again, adjust the animations tracking and maybe speed it up a little bit would do wonders to making this weapon actually make some appearances. The hammer is the number one melee weapon, or at least most commonly used one for a good reason. It's just too good in every single stat. So there's no, like, it's meant to be a zoning tool, so it has to be threatening if you do walk face first into it. I understand the damage, and I like the fact that the direct hit adjustment is not the priority with this weapon. It's meant to be used before they're staggered and to punish them with just outright damage when they rush down. So the attack power is fine, I think, but the impact and accumulative impact needs to be neutered. I would hope to see that the impact gets brought down to maybe 450, 500, so that the cap, if they hit by both, is roughly equivalent to the pulse blade, a little bit less. And the accumulative impact is also way too strong. 1,000 accumulative impact is madness. So I think bringing that down to maybe 300 would be a nice number there, just to give you 600 accumulative impact if they walk right into it. Keep in mind, it's doing a ton of damage outright, so it doesn't even really need to worry about whether or not it's staggering them outright, because by the time they rush you down, assuming you've used other weapons, you're likely going to stagger them anyways. So the most important change I think probably needs to be addressed is the cooling. This weapon should have one of the longest cooling windows in the game because it does such a huge amount of burst damage and impact with very little telegraph, very hard to dodge. Because it's just the way, and then the range on it, complicated by the fact that when it's on tetras, they can keep moving super agile, and so poke into. This is very common with lamb tetras. They can move so much while throwing both swings. If they use it, they had better not be able to use it for a very long time after that. Like if you manage to bait it out, you should have a generous window to try to capitalize. As it stands now, there's no window, especially with lamb kites, because they can backpedal for more than 3 seconds and before you can catch up with them. So they basically are just nonstop flicking this as soon as you're in range. Definitely need if everything else stays the same, this needs to be severely nerfed. But I do think that impact and accumulative impact probably need to see a small nerf as well. The Moonlight and Redshift have perpetually been in this sort of limbo where Redshift is always better. I made some suggestions before the patches that they make this weapon have a mini stun where the Redshift doesn't, and particularly on the charged, and just give it a different interaction in some fashion that makes it more competing with the Redshift. They tried to just make energy specialization, giving it more damage, a way to compete with the Redshift, but again, it just does not address the heart of the issue, which is that bypassing resistances just makes this so much more better, especially with the direct hit adjustment. So I think they just need to recognize that the redshift will be damage centric. I think that making the Moonlight mechanic and interaction differentiated would give it a unique niche. So adding a mini stun and speeding up the charge attack, I think on this would be huge. Now, if they had made that tied to the energy specialization, so you could charge it up faster like you can with other weapons, that would have been a great way to make this weapon different without making it too strong or somehow overbearing compared to the redshift. You could make it so that the charge up attack is actually reasonably good, and then the light attacks also come out faster. So yeah, if I could make one recommendation is tie the animation speed to the energy specialization speed to make this weapon sort of like a faster swinging, faster charging attack of the redshift rather than like a direct hit punish at range with the redshift. All right, and then finally for melee weapons, one that's very dear to my heart, the Coral Oscillator, or the Walt Coral Oscillator, I should say. This weapon doesn't do enough damage for the fact that its light lunge is basically a trade, or like it's got a very long window of exposure when you use it. Both the fact that it's a lunge, but two, after you actually do your lunge, there's a long recovery window that you basically take a free trade from the opponent with. So I think boosting the attack damage here is warranted. Probably 16, 1700. Heavy bipeds and tanks they just can soak up this weapon for way too long for its expenditure. Like the EN load on it is severe, and so you just don't do enough damage for what it costs and for what you're likely going to trade into in order to get the weapon to get the light lunge off. So first and foremost, give it more damage. Impact and accumulative impact I think is fine. Secondly, the recovery upon doing the light lunge needs to be sped up. That is a little bit too long, too punishing. This weapon's doing like basically the equivalent of bazookas, but except you have to get close and you have to do a lunge in order to use it. So give it something to make it actually worth taking that elevated risk would be nice. Granted, yes, it's coil damage, so you will do more damage with this weapon a lot of the times, but I also can't double fire it like I can with earshots. Again, it's one slot. I understand that it has some advantages here, but they do got to boost the damage. I felt it against heavy bipeds. It's just it takes way too long in order to kill those opponents, and it won't really make a difference for light mechs, because if I land the lunge and stagger them, they're dead anyways. So giving it that extra 300, 400 damage is really not going to make a difference to the fragiles. It'll only make a difference to the heavier opponents. The light attack animation also needs to occur faster. So as you may have seen in some of the earlier clips, if you're staggered and you're punch extending and then you go into the coral oscillator to finish off the punish, they can deploy the shields in time. And there's no reason for that. That doesn't make any sense. You don't even have to be punch extending, by the way. If you just stagger extend with the Zimmerman or the punches, you should be able to guarantee the light attack, but you can't right now because of that slow timing. So definitely got to speed that up in the coral oscillator. In terms of the charge attack power, I think this also needs to see a damage buff. It's very hard to ever justify risking this, even though if you've seen my previous video, I've come up with a tech to make the charge attack very viable as a punish, assuming no shield, and a lot of other things, like they're not aerial, like discrepancy in heights, that they're not super fast recovery mechs like reverse bipeds. But I think you got to see a pretty noticeable damage buff to this, something along the order of 2400, because it is incredibly hard to ever justify landing this or to ever land it at higher levels of play, and it is extremely easy to dodge. So if they're going to put this in the game, which I like the idea behind it, they got to make it so that you get rewarded for going for it instead of just using the light attack punish. And so yeah, damage is definitely needed on this. I already discussed the PA interference. I do earlier in the video. I do also think that oh, and then maybe impact too. This is probably fine. I mean, if the hammer though can justify like 1700, or maybe even 8. I think it's like close to 1800. I can't remember off the top of my head. But the fact that this charge attack doesn't get more than the hammer double swing is a little weird. So I feel like this should be the highest burst impact, not including some of the like the pile bunker charge and whatnot, but like just in terms of fairly reasonable to use mid-fight attacks, this thing probably needs to see a buff. And I do hope that they buff the cooling ever so slightly. Like even 220 would be fine. The fact that I need to triple punch into Zimmerman stagger extend in order to guarantee the coral oscillator is ready to go for the punish is pretty punishing and does not see a lot of use. Shields would just utterly shut this down if they don't adjust the PA interference stat either. So I don't want much. Just make it so that like at least after the triple punch, the coral oscillator is off cooldown and ready for another punch, or sorry, another swing. Swinging over to another area in melee, the PA interference stat needs a lot of work. So this 1.47 multiplier, where you basically you get like 47% added to your impact. So not your cumulative impact, by the way, because shields convert all impact into a cumulative impact after reduction. So the charged impact of the pulse blade's 1200, assuming they're using the fairly easy to use shield, the one that doesn't really take too much skill, the PS shield, you're looking at reducing the impact to 240 with a 47% multiplier. Means you're only going to get about 350 impact by landing the charge. That is far too low for given the consequences for melee weapon. They only get like one swing, and if you're not even having to use the skillful shield to parry this, this is far too effective. I feel like the stat, if it exists, needs to be addressed. I'd probably recommend 2.5 to 3, so a significant, like double the value here for PA interference. And if we do a little bit of math looking at why that is, let's take an example, again, using the same shield and the pulse blade. If we were doing a 2.5, let's say 2.8, we'll go right in the middle roughly, you're still only going to end up getting a little under 700 impact. I really think it needs to be about 700. And then this will create a really interesting interaction with shields that have very poor non-IG blocks. So if we take a look here, I'm just going to go to the left back unit. So if we're getting I'm actually going to be a little bit more aggressive here. Let's say we're using the pulse blade and we use a 3.0 multiplier for the PA interference stat, and then we're reducing it by 40%. That means we're actually going to get a bonus amount of impact. It's going to create a severe amount of pressure to IG block melee weapons, which I think should exist, by the way. That is not unreasonable given these giant IG windows, as you would have seen in the previous matches. It's not hard to parry, especially at higher levels. It's not hard to parry with this shield, so messing that up should come not with a discount on the stability, but rather you should be instant guard broken unless you're a super stable and no impact has been built up yet. But you could argue maybe I'm being a little bit too strict with it. Maybe 3.0 is a little too hard, and that value the math should maybe work out to about 1500, maybe like call it a 300 impact build-up bonus. But the point here is that messing up a parry on a melee weapon should come with consequences. Regarding which weapons ought to have the higher PA interference stat, the pulse blade, no brainer. I mean, it's a pulse weapon. This is supposed to be good against shields. The pulse blade is already such a best-in-class melee weapon, not because it's so good on its own, but just because all the other melee weapons are so bad. So I'm kind of loath to buff the pulse blade even more. But again, this is a no-nonsense, no-brainer change that needs to help temper the dominance of shields. Melee weapons ought, at least particularly the ones that lore-wise make sense. So Moonlight as a light wave weapon, coral damage definitely should have a strong PA interference stat. This should also be applied to the weapons too, by the way. So like the rifles, the coral rifles should definitely have a PA interference stat that's higher. I don't think they should be as strong as the melee weapons, maybe like a 1.8 multiplier in these cases or 1.7, but the point being that there should be a much more dramatic effect against shields if you have a weapon that can counter them. Removing the auto weapon swap upon purging your right hand needs to go. We want to be able to purge and then immediately go into punches if we want. Right now that you have to QB cancel after the purge in order to trigger it, which is time consuming and can often break combos. So if I purge my right hand, I don't want auto swap to the pistol. So that's something else I'll expect to be patched in the hopefully the near future. If I wanted to do a weapon swap immediately, I would just swap first and then do the purge. There's no need to add this into the game, and I feel like it's probably an oversight. Okay, moving on to melee and melee adjacent sort of aspects of the game that need addressing. Let's start with the Kikaku, and I've mentioned this one before, but the Kikaku is after patch 1.03.1, Lightweight's got an extreme speed buff, and the problem is that the Kikaku only has a couple of tools for closing the gap, and they were not recalibrated for this change. So you could argue that maybe they wanted lightweights to be more of a challenge, and that's fine. But the issue is that if you're operating at or even just below the ideal weight with the Kikaku, you can't actually catch lightweights using the knock legs and something like the Alula or whatever, assuming they're doing a reasonable amount of awareness and draining your battery and then going up, forcing you to go up with them. It takes the crux of the problem with the Kikaku is that the AB thrust is too slow. So the max AB speed is about 455, and I think the soft cap's right around there. And the speed that the Rensetsu kites will typically move is just under 400, and they also can jump with the knock legs. So It is even whether you body them into the corner first or against the boundary of the map and force them to go over you, or whether you AB at them or whether you melee thrust at them. The problem is that you are going to be bankrupt in your energy by the time you catch up to them. You might have enough energy for like one thrust where you finally close the gap, but it's extremely easy for them to dodge that, never mind if they have a shield. So the Kikaku needs to be recalibrated to make it so that you at least can fake them out once. I think that that is reasonable. You need to be able to close the gap with enough energy to attempt to, melee cancel once and play at least one small mind game with them. The melee attack energy consumption is also too high, I still think, in the game. So when you factor in QB canceling plus melee consumption, on average you're going to have 3 or 4 melee thrusts before you're completely bankrupt. And I feel like with the speed buffs that have happened, that probably needs to be recalibrated. I made a prediction before this patch that they were going to make these changes, but they ended up doing it to the Flugel and made the Flugel sort of a substitute Kikaku, which, I mean, I guess I appreciate that. If you run around 65,000 weight, then you can usually keep up with the Kikaku speed. The energy consumption still becomes a problem, but at least you got boost speed. So all the predictions I made for how to bounce the Kikaku just were applied and made the Flugel a stand-in, but they left the Kikaku hanging. So hope they fix that, but we'll see. That's what I think fundamentally needs to happen with the Kikaku, though. Most importantly, is energy consumption and efficiency has not been recalibrated for the speed changes in lightweights. It is now basically an easy to energy bankrupt Kikaku user. Okay, guys, that's basically it for my predictions. There's a couple other small things that I think need to be addressed. Things like the orbiter core just not having a home between the Alba and the VP core there. That's a little bit heavier on my double melee build. But I feel like those things can probably be tweaked on their own. I think the most egregious things that are needing to be patched are fundamentally tied to animations rather than just lacking stats. So hopefully from SoftSeas this, somebody converts it to Japanese and they make some of these changes, because they would definitely go a long way towards rebalancing some of the things that are just a little too oppressive right now and lifting some of the things that are just seeing zero use at higher levels of play. Thanks for watching, guys.